Hello.
This is Michael Sheen.
Hello.
Michael, can we start at the very beginning and go back to when you were growing up in Paul Talbot with no connections to the industry, and as I understand it, big dreams of being a footballer. Where did it all go wrong for you, and you decided to become an actor?
Oh, well, my family had been interested in what used to be called amateur operatics, which sounds very grand, but was actually just people coming and rehearsing once a week for what seemed like years to do one production.
Of a Gilbert and Sullivan.
Of a Gilbert and Sullivan, or, you know, a classic sort of musical. And it was a very sort of social thing. But then you got to be in a production, you know. And my dad was very much a frustrated performer. So he loved doing that. Many years later, he became the world's #1 Jack Nicholson lookalike. And we could do an entire session just on that, but I won't. So there was a kind of, within the family, we were just talking about relatives going back. My great-great-grandmother was an elephant and lion tamer.
Oh my God.
My great-grandfather on the other side of the family was actually a manic street preacher. He actually was. He used to preach on the streets, and he was fairly manic. So there was a kind of history of performance of one kind, whether it was in churches or on the street or in a circus or whatever. So there was a kind of an atmosphere in the family of, you got points for, you know, putting on an outfit. And there's a photograph of me when I'm about 4, sitting on the sofa next to my grandfather, and I've got a smoking jacket on and a pipe. So, you know, you can tell the kind of childhood there was. But then I didn't get into, I was obsessed with football growing up. It was only when I got to about, I started going to school and doing school plays, and I was encouraged to be in the school plays. And just being able to go into school at night time was very exciting. I found that very transgressive.
Being able to return to school at night.
Yeah, go in at night when, you know, there were no lessons, and being around the older kids and that kind of thing. So it was that like hooked me rather than actually being in anything. And then as time went on, you know, I did more stuff in the school plays. And then I joined, the teacher at school who taught directed the school shows, when I think I was 12, 13, he said, you should audition for the local youth theatre. I thought nothing about it. And so this man showed up and I did something, you know, for him. I didn't get in. And then the following year, bastard. And the following year...
They were destroyed. No one's ever heard of it.
Exactly. The teacher said, do it again, you know, audition again this year. So I did. I got in. And I joined this company called the West Glamorgan Youth Theatre. And at the age of 13 or 14 or whatever, I went to do these drama courses. And it went from about the age of 30, I was one of the younger ones, and it went through to about, I think you could still do it at 21, 22. There were people who were going to college and coming back to do the summer course and that kind of stuff. And we did all kinds of it. We did Shakespeare and Brecht and Arthur Miller and, you know, real proper stuff. And devised stuff as well. So people were writing things and improvising and doing all kinds of really good stuff. And you did residential courses in this big building in Swansea. So when I joined, I was one of the younger ones, and the older ones, because you all lived there in dormitories for like 4 weeks and rehearsed in the building and then did performances around the area in different theatres. And I remember the older ones were in charge of putting on social activities in the evening for everybody. And so one of the older ones at that time was sort of organising this social activity and hosted a cabaret. And me at the age of 13 sitting there, and this man, to all intents and purposes, you know, he seemed old enough to be a man to me, came out in a full dress and hosted the cabaret in full drag, and that was Russell T Davies. And that was my first chance at seeing...
And he hasn't changed.
It's not changed since then. No. And I found, you know, people often talk about finding their tribe, don't they? And that was it for me.
Because there were others. Were there others with you, Joanna? Was Joanna Page at a different time?
Yeah, at different
it's been
times.
hugely influential.
Yeah, massive. I mean, I discovered later, you know, you just sort of accept, or you take for granted, don't you? I didn't even know I was Welsh until I moved to London, because I just assumed everywhere was Wales, you know. But you know, it's each move that you do, you kind of look back and then you sort of put it into perspective somehow. So as time has gone on, I realised I was possibly in the greatest youth theatre in the world.
Yeah, yeah.
It was extraordinary.
Yeah.
And you know, and also what's gone hand in hand with that is me, as I've got older, realising, you know, when I was younger, I just thought I was brilliant, and it was all down to me, and it was my innate talent that got me a bit, you know. And as time has gone on, I've seen and realised and understood the work that other people did, the sacrifices they made, the things that they offered up to create opportunity for other people, including myself. And I think back to that youth theatre and all those teachers who were not getting paid to do it. They were giving up their holidays and, you know. Yeah. But it was an extraordinary training, an extraordinary opportunity for me. And so many people came out year after year, going to the top drama schools and out into the professions. Yeah. And, you know, this was an area that I came from that didn't have a huge amount of opportunity, to be honest. Yeah. And that youth theatre, and still to this day, I mean, all its funding has been cut and, you know, all the rest of it. But
it's still there.
Yeah, the very first, so I now run the Welsh National Theatre, a Welsh National Theatre company. And our base is in the Civic Centre in Swansea. And the very first people in there were the West Glamorgan Youth Theatre rehearsing their new show, which was really lovely, yeah.
So talk to us then about what was it like? Did you go from school directly to Rada? Was that
I was going to go to, I thought I was going to go to university first. So I tried out, that's not the phrase, is it?
That's the footballing
yes,
interview.
I didn't try out.
You tried out for Arsenal?
I had an interview for Jesus College, Oxford, because I was told that was the Welsh college.
Okay.
And I'd have a better chance of getting in there.
Okay.
Turns out I didn't.
Obviously wasn't the Welsh college then. Yeah.
I remember going there and these professors, teachers or whatever, there were three of them. And one was sitting on a chaise lounge over here. And every time, out of the corner of my eye, I could see him, he was just reclining more and more until he was completely horizontal on the chaise lounge. And I think he was taking snuff. I may be making that up. But, and I remember them asking me, who's your favourite writer? And I was just honest, and I just said Stephen King. And they said, they pretended not to have heard of Stephen King.
Oh, no.
I thought, this is not going well. So I didn't get in there. And I went to different universities to do either English or English and drama and that kind of stuff. And then I remember coming home from Warwick University, I think, which was very nice. But I remember thinking, I can't go to drama school and university. I wouldn't be able to get a grant to do both. It was the first time it sort of hit me. I thought, I want to go to drama school. It was at that point that my brain caught up with myself, and I was like, if I'm going to be an actor, I need to go to drama school, don't I? I realised I did actually want to be an actor. So I said to my mum and dad, I said to my mum, she came, I was up in my bedroom, and my mum came up and said, how did it go? I said, well, all right, but I want to be an actor. And so I need to go to drama school, is that okay? And she said, let me have a word with your father. And she went downstairs and then came up and said, we support you in whatever you want to do. So then I had to wait a year to audition for drama schools. So then I worked in Wales's first drive-through burger bar.
Okay.
Which was, I think, the proper training for an actor, picking up rubbish from the side of the motorway. So by the time I got to drama school, I was really ready for it.
Yeah.
And then off I went to London, to Rada, and did 3 years there, and then...
So what was that like then? If you thought that everyone was Welsh and you got to London and realised you were different, how was it?
It was a kind of double thing. So on the one hand, I went to London thinking that everyone was going to be, way ahead of me and brilliant, and that I would be really intimidated by everyone. And then I got there, and within a fairly short space of time, I realised that wasn't the case necessarily, and that I, held my own. Yeah. In fact, within the first 2 weeks, the principal of Rada called me into his office and said, one of the third-year actors has dropped out of a production, and he was playing a Welsh character, and we need you to step in. And it was being directed by Bill Gaskill. For anyone who knows who Bill Gaskill is, he was a scary man. He was like a massive figure at the Royal Court Theatre, bringing through new... He was incredibly influential, but he was quite frightening. And all of the third years, I discovered, were terrified of him. And it was like it was the tech. I was being brought in at the tech, and I had to take over this part. So obviously I was sort of saving the day. So he was very nice to me, but everyone else was terrified of him. And one of the actors in that company, one of the third years, was sort of took me under his wing and kind of looked after me. And he told me many years later that they used to, when they were doing their warm-up, the third years, part of their warm-up was this sort of chant they did, which is, why is the first year better than everyone else? And anyway, that actor was Rufus Norris, who I've just been...
Was he the one who dropped out? Or,
no, he wasn't the one who dropped out.
He was the one who took you
He was the one who took me under his wing.
Oh,
and,
showing true director skills already. Yeah,
yeah,
brilliant.
and so he's directed Nye, which is the production that I'm in at the moment. So on the one hand, I was, realizing that I could make a go of this, and that I wasn't going to be the kind of poor relations.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I was realizing, as I say, what was different about me, I suppose, in terms of coming from Wales. That I was starting to realize that a lot of the people that I spoke to said that their parents had never seen them do anything. So I was like, oh, well, my parents were very supportive, I guess.
Yeah.
Or people who had never been in a youth theatre, or never, I was used to coming from a place where there wasn't a huge amount of opportunity, but I had a lot of opportunity.
Had a lot of it, yeah.
Yeah, and, but also, I was coming here and thinking about, and we spoke about this a little while ago, I mean, most of my education was through television. And thinking back to growing up in the sort of 70s, I guess, 70s into the 80s, and watching television, and, there were fewer channels, so you tended to just watch whatever was on. So you came across a lot of things accidentally. And just a show like the South Bank show, that was sort of what really got me into the arts and stuff. Like, that's what educated me about. I was in Port Talbot, there was nothing really to go and watch there. There was nothing to see. So there was the television in the living room, and then being able to just randomly watch things that when my mum and dad weren't watching it, and to watch every Sunday night. 1 week it would be, the South Bank show would be about, Rudolf Nureyev, and the next week it would be about Eric Morecambe, and the next week it would be about David Hockney. And that's how I learned about the culture and the arts and stuff. Yeah. And that mixture of sort of highbrow and lowbrow as well, that I saw no difference really between someone like Eric Morecambe and a Laurence Olivier, or whatever it might be. And that gave me a real sense, like my sort of enjoyment of culture and entertainment came sort of directly from the South Bank show, really.
Yeah.
And so that was my window on the world. And coming from there, and then going to London, and suddenly this explosion of stuff around, it was a weird contradiction. On the one hand, realizing that in many ways where I had come from had very little opportunity, but that I had personally received very particular opportunities, and that has stayed with me really for the rest of my life.
What's your thinking about what it would be like for a young person who's not from London, who wants to be an actor today? When you look around, can you see, I mean, I know that the West Glamorgan theatre group is still going, but as you say, it's, we're all putting our pennies together to help it through, rather than it feeling that it's a kind of like buoyant and supported thing for the area itself. Do you have thoughts on all of that, or do you think it would be easier now because maybe there's more in schools, or?
Well, no, I mean, it is quite scary, isn't it? That, I look back on my pathway of coming through, starting with a supportive family, coming from an area, it was an old steel town, and sort of a tough place to grow up in. Not the sort of place you'd expect actors to be coming out of, but because we had Richard Burton that came from there, and Anthony Hopkins, I've again, one of the things I've realized as time has gone on, how important it is to see where you come from represented on the world stage, literally, and to know that it's possible. I grew up, I never questioned whether you could be successful as an actor, because Burton and Hopkins were, and they came from this town. Yeah. So why could I not? Yeah. But again, that's so unusual, coming from that sort of an area. So that's important. But coming from a sportive family, coming from growing up and having that sort of those school plays, so drama was happening in my school. Then there was a youth theatre that was funded through the education department of the county council, and then I got a grant to go to drama school. So just to get to the point of going to drama school, All of those things sort of had to be in place. All of those things have gone, essentially. You know, I think I was the last year to get a grant to go to drama school from my area. My youth theatre's funding officially got cut, so it doesn't get funded through the education department. You know, drama stopped being taught in the school. You know, I look at all of that, and a lot of the programs that I'm aware of that are to kind of support people coming from, you know, backgrounds that maybe aren't, have a lot of obstacles to get into the profession. A lot of them start quite late, and that's my worry, is that, you know, there's great things that are happening for people post-drama school or even just before to help them get to drama school. But, you know, more and more I started thinking, but you know, it needs to be like football. You need to get them when they're like 6, 7 years old. You know, you need to like start supporting people much younger.
Yeah, that's a very good
and help them, because a lot of people are just never going to get to the point where they get picked up in these sort of, you know, programs and projects. So that's one of the things that we're sort of trying to address with Welsh National Theatre as well. But yeah, there are so many things that need to be in place, and it does worry me that for young people who might want to get into this, you are relying on, you know, the bank of mum and dad, or, you know, it's really tough to even just to go and live in, you know, move to London, you know, or move to wherever these places are. That's why it's so important to get stuff out of London and into, you know, around the country.
The nations. But I think you make such a good point about the structure, because even if you somehow become lucky enough, forget the bank of mum and dad, because that's for such a few, but say you get lucky enough to somehow manage to get the means to get accepted into drama college. If you are just there and you're almost going at it from point zero, you know, that you haven't had that sort of that training already to build you up for what those 3 years, and then when you get at the end of that, you suddenly get a go and you're on the West End or you're doing whatever it is. If you haven't had the strength of some of those structures in place beforehand, it must make it very difficult. And I remember my first experience of you was when you did When She Danced, the Martin Sherman play. And I think that was one of the first...
That was my first job.
First thing. And I remember because my friend Kevin Elliott shared a dressing room with you. And Kevin Elliott, and in those days I was a lot freer and used to stand outside Kevin's dressing room on a Saturday night and throw things up at the window, and he would be kind of like, he was always there because he was never on stage or something, but he would be like, shoo, Michael's coming. And he said the whole experience of doing it, and he completely adored you, by the way, obviously, he said, but the whole experience of doing it was utterly terrified, because on the one hand, you have Vanessa Redgrave, who you just never knew when she was going to suddenly shove a banana in your face or do something completely unexpected different.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, he had you who responded to it, who had the confidence to catch it and do something with it. And he said, he's so annoying, this young actor. He's going to be absolutely brilliant. And he's really nice as well. And Kevin was kind of like stuck in the middle thinking, could you just say your lines? So
it's because I didn't know any better. I mean, that genuinely, I had the confidence of like not knowing anything.
You had the confidence, I think. And I think that's really important. That obviously something... Even your story about, okay, you're 2 weeks in and you have to, basically everyone else's anxiety dream is someone comes to you and says, okay, can you take over this role? And it's kind of brilliant, but the most stressful thing ever. And you rose. And I'm sure it's partly as you talk about the strength of the foundation that you had and just thinking, well, if they can do it, why not me?
Yeah, absolutely.
So brilliant.
I think there's a lot of things that have to come into play. And, you know, one of the challenges is, you know, I can look at my background and all the different things that had to be in place, you know, accidentally, coincidentally, or whatever, to allow me to do what I've done. And when you get to a point where you look back and you want to try and support other people to come through, you have to think about how much of that can you formalize. How much of that is it's just because it was a complete coincidence that this, that, and this came together? And how much of it can you actually start to try and lay down in a prescribed way so that other people can benefit from it? Some of it is impossible to, you know, it's just a sort of an accident. But some of it is possible to, I think. but you have to start much earlier.
Yeah.
I think not everyone is going to come from an area where there are world famous actors that have come from there, and so you have that confidence. But the more we start to try and make sure that not just actors, but writers and directors and composers and all the rest, everyone who goes into making something, producers, that people are able to tell their own stories.
Yeah.
I think for years and years and years, the best we could hope for sometimes is that somebody else from the outside told our story, whoever we are, but people who feel on the margins or are underrepresented, that somebody else would come in and sort of tell your story. But more and more I realize how important it is for people to tell their own stories.
Yeah.
And that requires a lot of work, because that's not going to happen immediately. Not every writer is suddenly going to be a Jack Thorne or a James Graham. You need to put the work in. And if you're putting the work in, you need to make sure that you're putting the work in the right places, so that the chances of people coming from areas that maybe don't get to usually tell their own story, that it's increased, that you will have a Jack Thorne or whoever coming through. So it really requires deep, long-term work that really looks at what are the things that are getting in the way for people to do this. But I think the more that people do have the opportunity to tell their stories themselves on behalf of their communities or whatever, the more exciting it is. I mean, the more, obviously, we hear the word diversity all the time, but just to have stories that you're not used to hearing. You think back to that period in the early to mid 60s, where suddenly, there was this sort of explosion culturally in this country, where, instead of just hearing people with RP accents telling their stories, all that, suddenly the people who were the quirky characters in the background were like front and center. Albert Finney in Saturday Night, Sunday Morning, Tom Courtenay, whoever it might be. Suddenly these stories, I think there was a sense that somehow that had happened, and that would never go back. We could never fall back from that. That was something that happened, and it would, and we would just keep moving forward like that. And the danger is that those things, I think, as we're seeing, not just in terms of culture, but generally in the world, things that we thought were battles that had been won for good, and that would never slip back. This is something that we have to fight for.
Now.
Every generation has to keep fighting for these things, and because if we take them for granted, they will just slip away from us.
So you moved away before you came back again. Your first, is it right that you're really the thing that your first sort of break in Hollywood was playing Tony Blair? Was that the thing that made a difference for you?
Yes,
do you think?
I suppose so. So my daughter grew up in Los Angeles. So me and my partner at the time, we sort of moved over to America for a while, and then we broke up. And so my daughter was growing up there. So I sort of found myself kind of going, well, I have to live here then. So I stayed there to be near her. And it was at a strange time in my life, I suppose, because I kept thinking, well, I should be playing Hamlet at the moment in the UK. And here I am going to audition for Techie number 2 in Alien versus Predator and not getting it. So it was a strange time. I spent most of my time sitting in diners reading Stephen King novels and doing very little. But eventually, I remember, because I had to keep coming back from America because I didn't have a work visa or anything like that. And so I would come back and forth. And whilst I was over here, I went to see a play, and a woman came up to me in the interval of this play and said, Stephen Frears is making a love story about Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. You should play Blair. I thought she was mental. I thought she was genuinely a mad woman. And I went, yeah, thanks very much. Okay, great. And then I got a call like a couple of days later, my agent, and I'd worked with Stephen Frears before because I'd done a film. The first film I ever did was a film called Mary Riley, which was the Jekyll and Hyde story. Julia Roberts playing the maid of Dr. Jekyll, and I played one of the servants in the house. I mean, that's a whole mad story in itself, which includes me going on a private jet with Julia Roberts to New York for the first time, me forgetting my passport and being allowed into America. Don't tell anyone. They'll have me now, I bet.
It's okay, because I've decided that our conversation, and by the way, just to let everyone know at the back, I haven't got a clock. I don't know if I'm meant to have one, but I think our hour conversation is now going to be 3 hours.
No, it won't be, don't worry.
So tell the stories, yeah.
But anyway, so I worked with Stephen Frears, and then, so then I had this call saying, Stephen would like to talk to you about this thing he's doing. And that ended up being something called The Deal, which was for Channel 4 about Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. And the extraordinary thing about that was that no one had done anything like that before at that point. If people made something about particularly contemporary political figures, it was always like a satire or, it wasn't taken seriously. And, since then, many things have been done like that. But it was the first one. So it was a massive risk, I remember. Nobody knew whether that would work or not. And it was the first time I'd ever played a real person.
Yeah.
It's the first time I worked with Peter Morgan.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we did that. And that went down very, very well. And led to eventually the film The Queen.
Yeah.
And and I remember being in Los Angeles, and I was committed to doing a play at the National Theatre, which is a big deal. I got to do a play at the National Theatre. But it turns out that this film, The Queen, was going to clash with this play. And I said, well, I can't do the film then, can I? Because I've given my word, I'm going to do this thing. I remember getting a phone call whilst I was like in a supermarket in LA or something from Stephen Frears going, what the fuck are you doing? You have to do this film, for God's sake. Anyway, it all got worked out. And I did that film. And of course, and and that was life-changing for me. And so then, living in America, living in Los Angeles particularly, and suddenly being in something that was doing very well, you realise how much living in Los Angeles is dependent on how well you're doing in the business, to be honest. So I'd gone from sitting in diners reading Stephen King novels on my own completely to then having a very different life.
Yeah.
And opening up all kinds of opportunities, back here as well as over there. And suddenly having a bit of choice and all those kinds of things. And that was, transformative, really. Can
I ask you, what is it like to prep to play a role where you're playing someone who's a real life character, which obviously you have done and you do brilliantly, versus playing someone who's not? I kind of wonder if it's like adapting a book rather than doing an original piece. They're both as creative and bring your own voice in and of itself.
Yeah.
But it's not like, oh, Michael Sheen can do Tony Blair, and then that's the end of it. You've done so many other real life characters as well. How do you prep for it? Are you
people
sick
often,
to death of people saying play this real life?
No. People often think that I must have been someone who did impersonations when I was a kid, which I never did. I was terrible. I couldn't do anything like that. And I think that's probably a good thing, because the thing I've discovered playing real people is that I have to put off for as long as possible trying to sound like them, or do the obvious things which is quite useful because I can't. So I spend a long period of time just watching footage of them and reading about them and trying to build. I sort of describe it as like being in a bath of them. You just sort of submerge yourself in them and their world and their life or whatever, and see what sticks, see what kind of connects. So like playing a fictional character, you're looking for connections. For a start, I guess in the script, the writer is telling you what the frame of reference for this character is. And obviously, if it's a fictional character, that writer has created the entire universe of that person. If it's based on a real person, there is infinite amount of choice. And the writer has decided these are the aspects of that person that we're focusing on. So I take my cue from the writer first and foremost to say, it's not a documentary. If I'm playing David Frost or Tony Blair or Brian Clough or Prince Andrew or whatever, it's the version of them that needs to be there for that story. And so you focus on that. So that already starts to focus you in on things. But ultimately, I'm trying to find connections with myself, because if it's just an impersonation, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I think it's like magic when people can do impersonations. I love it, but it's a different thing to what I'm doing, because I'm asking an audience to go on a journey with this character, and so that's always about getting people to connect with the inside of what's going on in someone. If you're doing an impersonation, you want people to connect with the outside of it and stay on the externals, because ultimately you're going to do, you know, a joke or a sketch or something. But with a story, you need to take them on the journey. So you're constantly looking to connect with the inside of that person. But of course, all your insecurities as an actor. I mean, the first time me and David Morrissey, who played Gordon Brown, the first time we ever did the read-through of the deal, and there was as many people as there are here at that read-through. It was terrifying. And you know, we open our mouths and we start saying the lines as these people that everyone knew in the room. It's terrifying. Because that's so terrifying, it makes you want to clutch onto that as early as possible so that you know you can do it. Right. But that's the worst thing you can possibly do, because it short circuits the journey that you need to go on, the research. So you have to keep that off as long as possible. But ultimately, you are playing yourself as well, you know. So I always think about, I don't know if have you ever seen those behind the music documentaries where there's someone who's sort of sitting at a mixing board in a studio. Hi, welcome to Behind the Music. Well, all those sort of dimmers and faders. I think of that as being like, that's me. And, you know, Michael Sheen is, you know, the volume is 8 and the, you know, whatever, they're all at different things. And then to play the character, I start to just change those dimmers, and you know, it goes up a little bit or down a little bit or whatever. And so it's still me. It's the raw materials of me. I'm just kind of changing it slightly to try and make it work. So that then when I'm playing the character, it's coming from somewhere. It's not. I'm not just putting on an act. It's like actually coming from somewhere rooted in me. But the challenge that I enjoy as well is, on top of that, there is also the challenge of you have to get people to believe. That, or accept that you are this person that they're already familiar with. And that's, you know, the brilliance of Peter Morgan as well, as a writer, who I've worked with, you know, many times on a lot of these real people roles, is that he very, very cleverly uses people's expectations of these people.
Yes.
So, you know, if it's Frost and Nixon, or if it's Blair and the Queen, you know, everyone has a relationship, whether they're aware of it or not. And everyone has certain expectations, and he's brilliant at kind of making you feel like you're seeing under the veil, or surprising you, or coming up with something different to what you were expected. And that's very, very smart. And that's, you know, that's just one of the things that make it brilliant.
So how does it work then? Because obviously, Good Omens, and by the way, I'm not going to ask you about Neil Gaiman, because I think that's someone else's story, but I do want to know about how you work with David Tennant, for example, on that, because the preciseness with which you both land your own shared tone while doing completely different and out there performances, it's so finely wrought. It also looks like you're having an absolute ball. How did you do that on your own, or do you know, you're doing your Michael Sheen behind the music on your own, or do you do that with David, or is it something that organically happens? Do you talk to each other about it? How does?
Well, that's interesting, because I mean, David and I, for many years, I mean, we knew each other, you know, sort of socially or whatever. And we'd been in one film together, a film called Bright Young Things that Stephen Fry directed. But we had no scenes together, so we didn't really know each other. And mainly that's because we were often up for the same parts. So there was usually one role that David and I would both be up for. Like, he got Casanova, I didn't, but it was sort of, you know, and or I got this, and he, you know, blah, blah, blah. So there was a lot of that going on.
You got Brian Clough, come on.
Exactly. So then when we were actually in the same, you know, the same thing, and that's partly what makes it work, I think, that we are kind of like similar.
Yeah.
Light and shade of the same. So we could play each other's characters. And in fact, originally, I was meant to play the other character. And we sort of swapped it around. Yeah. But that in that instance, it was the case that we really didn't know what was going to happen. And we sat down to do the first read-through again with everyone there. And we started reading the scenes, and I think we both just kind of, we just sort of, it was like a dance. It was like you go, oh, I see, or you're doing that, right? You're going, right, if you're doing that, I'll do this then. And within, I would say probably, you know, I don't know, a couple of scenes, it felt like we'd clicked. And that, you know, and you never know whether that's going to happen or not. And then I think, and then moving on from that, we developed our characters off each other. So rather than working on something yourself in isolation, it was completely about how we worked off each other.
So shows. It so shows
well,
that you did that.
Yeah, and I suppose that, you know, when people talk about chemistry, that you know, you feel very lucky when you meet someone that you have chemistry with, and that's also to do with, I suppose, I think we both feel the same way about. I mean, we both got healthy egos, but at the same time, you know, we both feel the most important thing is to make the scene work as well as possible, and to serve the writer and the piece. Yeah. And when you've got that as your kind of lead incentive, then it makes things very easy. And so just, you know, we spend a lot of time on set together. And so just, we have a laugh, and it's just pleasant to be together. But the work is what, you know, I've said this before, but one of the most off-putting things sometimes is being in a scene and just, you know, looking at the other actor and going, oh my God, that's very good. That's so good. And you know, and the collaboration that we had with Douglas McKinnon, who directed the first two series, and you know, and Neil when he was part of it. It was a very collaborative process, and it was very exciting. And then also, as time went on, well, after the first series went out, to see the kind of see what it meant to people, you know, the fandom and the people who were into it. To see how it, you know, I still get very moved by seeing how many people, you know, people who've come to see me doing Nye recently, people coming from all over the world because of being Good Omens fans, and they've met each other. That is the
power of TV.
Oh, it's extraordinary, and it's been life-changing for people, you know, in all kinds of ways, and that is something that I think is something that has grown obviously over the last however many years, but that people feel that a TV show can be not just something that is entertaining and life-changing for you, as things have been for me watching it, but you can actually be part of a community now, and it can be really transformative in all kinds of ways.
So tell us why, I mean, I could go on for ages more about, or ask you to go on for ages more about your acting, but tell us about why you returned to Port Talbot, and what that meant, and what from there made you decide, okay, I'm going to set up a Welsh National Theatre.
Well, life, I've discovered that life has been a series of strange turns. There's that John Lennon thing, isn't there, about, you know, life is what happens when you're making other plans, and that has very much been the case for me. I did in 2011, when the very first National Theatre in Wales was set up. I was part of that first season, where I did something called The Passion in Port Talbot, which was one single performance that lasted non-stop for 72 hours that took place all over the town, and that just changed my life in all kinds of ways. And one of the things that it changed my life was that I sort of got to know my community, the community I'd grown up in a completely different way, and I met people who were doing work in the community that I had never heard about, I had no idea existed, that were supporting some of the most vulnerable people and people going through the hardest times, and through the relationships I made doing that production, which was ultimately a celebration of all that. It was a way to try and celebrate that and tell that as a story. So those relationships I made, I stayed with me and you know, developed, but also it sort of awakened something in me because I worked on it for a few years, and so I would come in and out of the town, back and forth between America and Port Talbot.
It's a mammoth undertaking.
Yeah, it was huge, yeah. But I would notice that, you know, I would meet someone when I was there, for instance, a woman who had lost her son, who was actually in my class when I was growing up, in a horrible accident, and he had died, and she never had any grief counselling because there was no such thing in the area. And I bumped into her whilst we were, you know, working on The Passion, and she said that she had got a little bit of money from the council to set up a grief counselling service in the town, and she was doing it out of a little room in a community hall or something. You know, amazing, what an extraordinary thing. And then when I came back a few months later, it had gone, because that money had gone because the council budget had been cut. And I was noticing this more and more as I was, you know, working on this, that not only was I kind of in awe of what people were doing in the community and the work they were doing, but I was also becoming more and more aware of how much pressure it was under, how little it was supported and funded, and how important it was. And I started to ask questions that I sort of felt ashamed that I'd never really asked before about, well, why is this the case? Why is this like this? And I started to kind of learn a bit more about, you know, particularly as an actor, I was working in all kinds of areas and, you know, having these extraordinary opportunities and seeing very different communities and very different sets of opportunities for different groups of people in different communities. And inevitably, because I was constantly going back and forth to where I come from, inevitably you go, well, why is it so different? And it sort of started something in me, I guess, that ultimately led to me coming back and moving back to Wales. I'd been working in America. My daughter had got to, you know, 18, left home, went off to college. The series that I'd been doing there for about 5 years came to an end, and everything just sort of fell into place. And I thought, right, I'm going back then. And I'd always sort of assumed that I would go back to London, but then it became clear that no, I needed to go back to Wales.
Left, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to go back to Port Talbot and get more involved with these relationships that I developed. I realized that I could either, it was getting to the point where I didn't want to just have a photograph taken to be put in the paper to, you know, support this organization. I wanted to do more than that. I wanted to get more involved. As I was starting to get more resources, I was getting paid better for my work. I was having more choice. I was being interviewed more, and as the profile, you know, developed, and I was able to choose more what I wanted to do. I realized I had an opportunity, you know, that I had something that could help a lot of these relationships. But it meant either, so the amount I was doing that was involved with them was getting so big that I realized I either had to take a step back or I had to take a step forward. I couldn't stay where I was. And so I decided to take a step forward. And so I started to completely change the way I thought about my career. My career at that point, I felt like, was the engine to be able to do what I wanted to do with those people and organizations and causes. And that I knew that there was a window, you know, that wouldn't last for that long. And eventually, when I didn't have as much choice, I didn't get paid as much, all that kind of stuff, it would come to an end. But whilst it was there, I wanted to use it. The first big attempt that I did to that sort of backfired, and I lost everything. But I learned a lesson from that.
What was that?
That was when I brought the Homeless World Cup to Wales.
Where you notoriously sold 2 houses and
yes,
went
2 houses.
Debt.
It makes it sound like I have 7 houses.
Yeah.
No, I sold the house I had been living in LA that I'd moved from to move into a house in Wales.
Yeah.
And before I could sell the house in LA,
yeah.
This happened. Yeah. So the lesson I learned from that, though, was that even though I sort of, you know, put everything I had into making this work, I realized that I could do that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, as long as the maths worked and there was money coming in, I mean, I wasn't expecting COVID to come, but nevertheless, that was a little blip. Yeah. But, you know, I realized, well, as long as I can still earn money, I can keep doing this. Because everyone who I knew, and I suppose I as well, assumed that when the shit hit the fan with the Homeless World Cup and I had to put everything into it, well, clearly you're not going to do that again. And actually, I came out of it going, I sort of can do that again, because I can see how this works now. And you realize why people in business talk about it's basically about juggling debt. And that was part of what got me into debt, not literally into debt, although it was what got me into debt.
Buying off
but
£1 million
understanding debt as well, and realizing that for some people, you have access to credit in a certain way and how much you need it, and other people don't, and blah, blah. And that led to doing all the debt stuff as well. But it did make me realize that I could do things in a different way. But it took that kind of disaster in a way for me to
be able to learn from that.
Yeah.
So is that, do you look then to balance that out? Do you think, all right, I can do three months, I need to go off and bring the cash in order to spend 9 months putting it out there?
Yeah,
How are you?
I mean, for a chunk of time, I didn't have to really think about it too much because there was work coming in, and, you know, I didn't really have to worry about it. I knew it worked. I've got to the point now where, because of the state of the industry, but also, you know, I've got to the point in my life I've got to, and it doesn't quite work the same way, so I've got to be a bit more careful about it now. So having now launched this Welsh National Theatre Company, so just to give some context, the National Theatre of Wales, that the Passion was a part of, they had all their funding cut by the Arts Council in Wales at the end of 2024, and which essentially brought the end to the National Theatre. So it's the National Theatre of Wales was the Welsh National Theatre in the English language. There's also a Welsh language National Theatre. But it brought an end to that. And I was just about to start rehearsals on Nye at the National Theatre in London. And so there was a lot of Welsh actors in a room all talking about how our National Theatre had gone and what are we gonna do? And ultimately, that's within also the context of Welsh National Opera getting huge cuts, Welsh National Museums, all the arts in Wales started to feel very low morale, felt like there was no support from government. It was sort of on its knees. And what does that say about us as a country, as a nation, and our relationship to the arts and all that kind of stuff? And so I thought, well, I'm not having this. So, so I thought, well, I sort of perversely, I suppose, feel like when we're being offered like crumbs, say, no, I don't want crumbs. I want multiple cakes, please. So to be more ambitious, bigger, bolder. And I found myself kind of in conversations with people talking about, well, if there was going to be a Welsh National Theatre, what should it be? How could it look? How might it work? And as I was describing it, I realised that I was essentially describing something that I had to do.
You had to do it.
Yeah, and that if I didn't, and I found myself in this position a few times, that nobody else is saying that to me, but I can hear in my own head going, oh, fuck, I can't keep saying this if I'm not prepared to do it myself. So I either shut up or I do it. And so that was when I sort of decided that I sort of had to do it. And then once I'd made that decision, then I was very happy about it because then it was very exciting. And but it's in the moments before it, you go, oh, no, I wasn't planning on doing this.
Yeah, no.
I was going to go and have a lovely life, and oh no. And then of course it becomes an even better life because then you're doing something.
So tell us where. Tell everyone about where you are with it and what your first play is and how you feel.
Right, yeah. Well, in a lovely sort of coming back round, the first production we're going to do is a production of the American classic play, Our Town by Thornton Wilder, but seen through a sort of Welsh lens. And the person who is creating that Welsh lens is Russell T Davies.
Is the man in the dress.
So the man in the dress, yeah. And in another sort of beautiful coming around as well, the West Glamorgan Youth Theatre was supported by the Swansea Education Authority, whose headquarters was the Civic Centre in Swansea. And our base, the Welsh National Theatre, is now in that exact building because that doesn't get used for the council anymore. So we are based in there. And as I said, the very first thing that happened was the West Glamorgan Youth Theatre came in and rehearsed their new show in there. So we're based there. We have no money still. But I've paid to commission writers to have new plays, new Welsh plays. I'm trying to, our first production, Our Town, will go around Wales and then come to London. Our second production is a new play by Gary Owen called Owain and Henry about Owain Glyndŵr. So it's one of the big stories of our culture and our nation. And it'll be on at the Millennium Centre sort of around the time of the Senedd elections, which look like it's gearing up to be between Plaid Cymru and Reform, which is sort of what the play is about. So there's going to be a big national conversation, I think, going on that it feels like what we're going to be doing at the time will be very much at the heart of that.
Yeah.
And
thank you for that.
Thank you. But we're trying to, I created this thing that I call the Welsh Net, which I sort of referred to earlier, which is about using the football. I was scouted as a kid playing football and offered a place at Arsenal and never went. But I've often thought, why can't we do the same thing with the arts? When I played in a football for Baglan Boys Club at the side of the A48 dual carriageway in Port Talbot, I always knew that there was the possibility that there was someone standing on the side watching it who could plug me into potentially, go into the big leagues and stuff. So I've sort of used that model basically to try and build something that we're calling the Welsh Net, which is about having scouts, like culture scouts throughout Wales, embedded in their communities, watching things, whether it's professional shows, amateur shows, youth shows, school shows, whatever it might be, and looking out for talent, and then reporting back to us regularly. And then we look at trying to work out what the next step might be for those people to develop them, whether they're 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, whatever, however age, or up to 50, 60, whatever. But what's the next step? And if that next step exists, then I use the engine of the Welsh National Theatre, that institution, to kind of make that next step for them. And if it doesn't exist, we look at how we can create that next step till we build pathways that lead not just to the Welsh National Theatre, but allow Wales as a nation to kind of develop those pathways for itself. So that's happening as well.
I love that. In a very bad time management, not for the first time in my life on my part, we've got about 6.5 minutes left. So questions, very, very fast questions from the floor. If we turn the lights up and people stick their hands in the air, but while we are doing this, I'm going to ask one from the app. If you want to just look, and there's a woman there. But Michael, quickly, how to stay motivated as an actor if there are no job opportunities for a while? Brilliant question.
Well, so when I was a kid, I always used to say, I would do this even if I was just acting on the streets in Port Talbot, and no one pay me. And then I did act on the streets in Port Talbot doing The Passion, and it was probably the biggest thing I ever did and the most successful thing. So I always felt that, again, when we were talking about the elements that come together, and some, maybe you can kind of formalize for other people to and then some you can't. One of the things I'm not really sure where I got this from, but I always had a kind of confidence that this was just what I did. Like, it wasn't my job. It was just what I had to do. I needed to do it. And the fact that I got paid for it was great, and that but I would do it, I would have to do it. Even if I had another job, I would still have to do this. And I think that confidence is what keeps you going. Because then when the job offers aren't there, I've been very fortunate that I haven't had to be in a position where I have to kind of wait for other people to give me the work. Like, it's been there. So, you don't know, what comes first, the chicken or the egg. But the confidence of going, well, I'm just doing this. This is what I'm doing.
No matter.
And so if I don't have a job, then I will do it with my mates. And when I was at drama school, my two best mates were back at home in Wales, and they hadn't gone to drama school yet. And I remember I would see shows in London, and I would come back and I'd say, right, we're doing something like this company called Complicity, and we're going to do it in Porthcawl Comprehensive School, and we'll just do it. And that's what we did. And that sort of breeds a kind of a... I do think as well that one of the things that you can sort of, share with people about that is that I think being creative does change something in you. You give something off. Like, when people come into audition, if it matters too much to them, in a way, in the wrong way, you can just sense it. And I think the way to not have that desperation when you go into a room is to make sure you're being creative in your own life as much as possible, because it sort of switches something on somehow, I think, in you. It just changes your chemical makeup. And being creative begets creativity, I think.
That's such a
and
good
so that
note.
would be one thing. Just do as much as you can and get back to what it is that gives you the spark in the first place, rather than it becoming too much, this is my job and everything depends on it.
That's a great note for all acting, writing, all those things that can be difficult. Yes.
Yeah.
Hello.
I'm Louise from Radio Times.
Hello.
I'm also a very big Good Omens fan, and I loved what you said about the fandom. I wondered, have you got any kind of reassurances or anything you can say about the finale episode, which everyone is so excited for?
It's not up to me.
Considering it went through those.
I'm not in control. But it's made, and hopefully people will enjoy it, as and when.
Oh, yes. Oh, sorry, it's round there. Yes.
Hi, Michael. I'm Tanya from Seymour Studios. We have developed an amazing Creative Careers for Primary Schools programme, which we're piloting and getting amazing feedback from. I completely am buzzing about what you just said about having to reach people younger, because that's totally our aim, and we're piloting in underserved communities. And we'd love to run a pilot across Wales. And would you like to, in front of all these lovely people, tell me that you'll help?
Let's do it.
Yay!
Yeah, great. More the merrier.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a quick one.
Hello. Just a hello from Claire Inglehart, by the way, from
Oh,
Passion.
Claire did the
Cornwall.
music for The Passion.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Thanks. In terms of what you said about the National Theatre of Wales and access to communities, have you been inspired by, have you got a relationship with the National Theatre of Scotland in the sense of not having a kind of set building, but going out into the communities? Because when I think of myself, say, a second-generation Asian in London, the idea of national theatre, that word national, is quite intimidating. So I just wondered if you could say a few words.
Well, when I was filming Good Omens up in Glasgow, I went to meet Jackie at the National Theatre of Scotland. And it's one of the things that I've found talking to a lot of people who run companies, you know, ADs of companies or whatever. They sort of, I go in there saying, oh, we've got no money and we're starting from scratch, thinking that's a bad thing. And they say, oh, I'm so jealous of you. Because they look around at these buildings and staff that they have and this organization they have, which grew up in very different financial circumstances. So, which now feels like a massive albatross around their necks. Or not an albatross, but you know what I mean? Suddenly, organizations that developed in very different circumstances are finding it really tough, now. That's when I started to realize that actually the thing that seemed the biggest challenge to me for what I was doing was actually possibly our greatest gift, that we're starting it now and it needs to meet the needs of now rather. And this is, I suppose, something that can be extrapolated much wider, which is that a lot of the time, I think, in any industry, but certainly in ours, we're sort of living like a few years ago, still trying to think what people were into then or what structures need to be in place. And it's difficult to kind of really look at where you are now and make things that suit now. And I suppose, had that opportunity, and I needed to have that reflected back to me from places like the National Theatre of Scotland and stuff. And because part of you kind of goes, right, I need credibility, so we need a building, and we need people to work for us, and we need offices and all. And one of the things, again, that I think that maybe I can bring to what I'm doing now is I'm not trying to really prove anything to anyone. I just want to do what I want to do. And so there's a certain amount of credibility or whatever that comes with it. I don't have to use other things to get that. So I try to put everything into the work we're doing and hopefully create something and build something that's not going to get too big for the wrong reasons, remains fluid and kind of lithe and spare, and focuses on the things that it needs to focus on. And so that's one of the things that I learned from that. But yes, the idea about what does national really mean? What should something that purports to be national, what does that actually mean? Whose stories are you telling? As one discovers, there are many, many different communities and stories within one national culture. And it's so exciting to address that rather than to try and make it homogenized and, to really explore what all those different stories are. So that's what I've been learning from that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I am really sorry. I am so sorry, but we are completely out of time. That is completely on me. As I said, my bad management. Dominic, you sent a question in via the app, but I'm hoping that Michael's answer about how to stay motivated will help with that. Michael, I have one last question for you that everyone is being asked to celebrate 50th anniversary of Edinburgh Television Festival. Quickfire question, greatest television show for you of the past 50 years?
British or world?
I would say British, but you can have world if you want.
Well, I did have to answer this question about the British version for something in the Times this weekend. So, but I'm gonna cheat. And I'm gonna say three things then, because you've opened it up outside of Britain. So I'm going to say three things. I'm going to say Wolf Hall, Gavin and Stacey, Twin Peaks.
Nice. Okay, we'll take that. Michael, thank you very, very, very much. I'm sorry, everyone, you didn't have a chance to ask all the questions you wanted. Genuinely, I think we could have done 3 hours with Michael Sheen. All I can say is you have opened the festival for us. Thank you so much. No one better than you.
Have a great festival.
We are so glad you're here.
Enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.